All right, joining us today is Russ Eidman, a professional coach for the last 30 plus years. Russ has coached in almost every club type of environment imaginable. And most recently, Russ has actually built his own pool. You may have recognized him from some of the talks that he's had at some of the ASCA clinics, chronicling his experience with that project. And today, Russ is going to be sharing a little bit about his story with coaching, lessons learned, and a little bit about that project as well, of how to build your own pool and how to be entrepreneurial in the process of coaching and building up your coaching career. So, Russ, thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the business of swimming.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, Russ, thank you so much. And we've talked with you about that project of building a pool, which we're going to dive into. But first, just kind of give everybody context, like who is Russ Eidman? Talk about your coaching career, the different roles you've had, and just kind of let us know like why this pivot, later in life, later in your coaching career, what spurred you to take on this big risk?
Sure. So I started coaching swimming straight out of college, and I went straight to being the head coach for a very small YMCA team in a small town in Oregon where I grew up, where I went to college. So straight from the University of Oregon, I accepted a job with a tiny little YMCA on the Oregon coast in a town of about 5,000 people. So naturally, in that sort of a position, you're not going to just coach swimming. So that job is no little YMCA in a town that size is going to have a full-time coaching job. You're the aquatics director and you're coaching swim team and you're coaching the high school team. So I guess right out of the gate, I learned to wear many hats. Okay. So from the very beginning of coaching swimming, I was also learning how to care for a pool. I was a certified pool operator before I even took my first coaching job because I helped take care of the pool at the University of Oregon. I was a lifeguard. And so I worked my way up to manager. And so I'm, learning how the pumps and filters work. And so I've got these kind of two tracks going on at the same time, competitive coaching and aquatic facility management and operations simultaneously. So from the very get-go, the pieces started being put in place for what I do now, not because this was the plan. It just so happened that when you're a coach, oftentimes you learn to wear different hats because coaching by itself doesn't pay the bills. So I know a lot of coaches that are school teachers, they rush to the aquatic center when school gets out and or they're aquatics directors at the pool, which is always nice fit because you don't have to rush off anywhere. You just leave your office and walk out on the pool deck and start practice. So that's nothing new or different or unique for coaches to do multiple jobs to make ends meet. But sometimes we don't always leverage that, right, to the full extent we could. Oftentimes, I think the majority of instances, you have somebody that's in aquatics management and they coach. So now you're working even more hours, right? And if you're going to coach at a reasonably high level, that's really a full-time job by itself. If you're a head coach of a team, and you're hiring and training and managing assistant coaches and budgets and travel to, I guess it just depends, but I think a lot of coaches get into it with that dream, that long-term dream of having that head coach job that is a full-time job. Those are very rare positions that actually pay a living wage, and they just pay their dues and work the extra hours and work the side jobs until they, have a couple of great athletes to work with to make a name and then land the head coach, be the head coach of, Mission Viejo or Dynamo or Swim Atlanta or, the big coaching job, right? Or move on to college coaching or something like that has a reasonable salary. But over the years, it seems like I always went from small team to small team because I started out as a head coach. The good thing I think about how I started out was in the first few years, knowing nothing and being a head coach, you make a lot of mistakes, but you learn a ton. You learn a lot more than the coach of, you coach the gold group, you coach the silver group, and you learn your little world and you don't go to the board meetings. You don't worry about the budget. You don't worry about, you know, setting up the travel. You just coach your group. You don't grow nearly as much. But when you dive in with both feet, you're the head coach, you have to learn everything. You got to learn websites and the whole nine yards. So, and then having the broad range of, coaching high school, coaching club, coaching masters. I mean, my first 2 years of coaching, I had masters athletes and coaching club swimmers, and running the
Mhm.
pool for the Y. So you learn a lot. Of course, the downside is, pay, right? You're not going to make a decent salary at a YMCA in a town of 5,000 people, even if you have junior national qualifiers, even if you have a master swimmer that breaks world records. Guess what? You still don't get a raise, in that environment. So you pick up and eventually you give up and you move in search of, paying the bills. But I always seem to stick with smaller teams because I started out as a head coach. And that's kind of hard to take a step back from and be, when you're the boss, to turn around and be somebody's assistant.
Mhm.
I did do it and do it happily and successfully for about 4 years. In the middle of my coaching career, I went and I was the head age group coach for a team. And that was weird, right? Because it was a lot less work. It's like I'm not doing everything. I'm not trying to do the marketing and the growth of the team. I'm just doing my job. So that was just a brief period, and then after that went back to being a head coach again, and always seemed to be, worked for two more YMCA's. I had other aquatics director positions, that sort of thing. But then, I never chose where I was going to coach based on advancing up the coaching chain. So I didn't let my coaching career dictate my life. My life dictated my coaching career. So I was going to be married happily, have kids, raise kids. And so I coached where life took me, where my wife needed to live for her job. I just coached there. I didn't, I wasn't the bachelor who could just make life revolve around this position with this team is going to, advance my career, whatever. I just tried to bloom where I was planted. And so what that does is that gives you another variety of experience, having coached in the Northwest of the country and then in Southern California and coached in Georgia and coaching in Arizona and Texas. You see how swimming operates in different parts of the country. You learn to deal with a lot of different kinds of customers. You just have a broader range of life experience, kind of helps to launch something crazy like what we're doing now.
So something that immediately comes to mind for me, my coaching journey, I just turned 23 and kind of
Mhm.
fell into this head coaching role within a JCC environment. We always talk about the various hats that you have to wear, especially on the small team, especially if you're a head coach of a team like that. I think at the time, with little direction and a lot of different hats that you had to wear, I wasn't really sure which hat was like which one to prioritize.
Mhm.
Given your experience and having worked with many, many teams, for a coach that's in that similar type of situation where they're coming into a team, maybe they're going to revitalize the program or grow it, and they're kind of looking at this sea of different things they're going to have to do, what takes precedent? Like, what would you say is the most important things to really understand about running a team? Um, when you have all these different things that you have to do.
I think first and foremost is knowing yourself. You have to know your strengths, weaknesses, talents, gifts, and be honest enough with yourself, which is where a lot of people are afraid to go, right? They're not honest with themselves that, look, I really suck at administrative duties, or I'm not a people person, or I'm not a salesman, or I am a really good salesman. Or but there are a lot of things that if you're going to be a head coach, or if you're going to, as you said, turn around a failed program or start a program from scratch, there's a lot of hats you have to wear, and not everybody's good at everything. you know I was blessed in my current situation that the part of it that I really don't like, I found Captain to do that for me. So, I pretty much now I enjoy doing all the things that I'm good at, that I'm really good at, and that I enjoy. I do that every day. And registering new students takes like 60 seconds, and then the money just magically appears in my account, because Captain takes care of all of that stuff, right? And the organization and the stuff that I really don't want to spend my time doing. If you are honest with what you're good at, and then you're honest about what are the gaps, okay? What am I lacking? And then you stop and take a look around and see, well, what partners do I have in this? Or who can I Who can I call on? If you're working with people's children, there is nothing more important to that person than their kids, right? You're working with the most valuable thing in that person's life. Even if they work a busy, high pressure job, if their child is involved in something that they think is really worthwhile, they will take time and fill in gaps for you. They will work extra hours to help you create something because it's going to benefit their child, and a lot of people just are, I think they're either afraid to or just maybe not wise enough to take a look around and first do an inventory of themselves, and what they bring to the table, what they're lacking, and then look around and find, partners to fill in those gaps.
Yeah. No, right, asking for help. It's a hard thing to do when you're young and energetic and ready to conquer the world, but it's a critical skill to have is understanding yourself and understanding where you need help. Businesses at the end of the day are people, processes, and technology, right? And you want to find the people to help gap fill, the technology to help gap fill, and then build your processes around those two things. So real quick, like you bounced around clubs, you moved, you prioritize the right things in life, which is, family and health and all those wonderful things, which is really good. But I think a lot of coaches today and a lot of clubs today struggle to find a way to make swim coaching a career, right? Not just a side hustle, really. Like for a lot of coaches who work multiple jobs, they probably spend more hours off deck working than they do on deck working many times, right?
Yeah.
And so when you made this transition to Patriot Swim School, what was that percentage change for you in take home pay? Like, did it provide you that financial security that you were looking for? And uh, what effect has that had on your life?
Yeah. So our current situation is that we're I'm running just a swim school, but now I have my own water. Okay. So today I make 2.5 times my best coaching salary that I ever made
Wow.
in the 33 years that I coached. My best salary, the best year when I was coaching a larger team, and I had, like, there were 6 satellite locations that I had to drive around to and manage coaches at those other locations and stuff. And, working 60 hours a week. Now I work 3 or 4 hours a day and I make 2.5 times what I made my best year coaching. The difference is it's my water, because this isn't the first time I've done Patriot Swim School. I've done Patriot Swim School before in Las Vegas, where you arguably had access to a whole lot more customers, but utilizing someone else's pool. And so I was doing at the time I owned my own swim team and a swim school, but we rented from the pool at Nellis Air Force Base. And we had a great rental rate, but you still using somebody else's pool. I made an okay income for a coach. You're running a swim school and coaching a team, and I made not my best salary out of my 33 years of coaching, probably my second best. So, I lived okay, but just doing basically the same thing I did there, doing it here, but it's my water, and now I keep, twice as much as I did before.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and within that, so this is interesting too. Now you really have like experience just across, across a pretty wide scope. So you talked about the first version of Patriot. That was a business that you owned as well, right?
Correct.
Was that a 501(c)(3) nonprofit or was it a for-profit entity?
So the competitive team was three that I had a board that I appointed, that I was the president of. So basically, I had a board, that of parents that were obviously interested in the success of the team that I could leverage to fill in the gaps like we just discussed.
Mhm.
But a board that didn't have, not a traditional board where I was employee of the board, where they were, decide, well, we're going to replace you, right? So they were my board that I assigned duties to. Um, but it was that was a nonprofit. And then a Patriot Swim School has always just been a sole proprietorship, just because of the limited size and the simplicity of it. It's, taxes and that sort of thing. It's just always been a sole proprietorship.
And so a follow-up to that first version of Patriot is I think that might be the route that entrepreneurial coaches might be looking at first before trying to identify like a place to build their own pool.
Hmm.
What was that process like going through, like setting up a nonprofit? Was it fairly simple?
No, no, and it's gotten worse in the last 10 years. It's gotten much more expensive and involved to start a nonprofit. Just I think because of a lot of abuse, a lot of people started nonprofits to for tax advantages, things where maybe it wasn't exactly appropriate.
Hmm.
So the government's really cracked down, made forming a nonprofit more expensive and more involved. But even when I did it, that was primarily the role of the board was to handle all of that so that I could focus on coaching their kids. And again, if you're good at what you do and parents see value in what you do, they're willing to put in hours and stuff to make that program happen for their kids.
Yeah. So version one of Patriot Aquatics Swim School, right? What are a couple lessons you learned from that experience that you brought over to the Texas version of Patriot Swim School?
So I think number one is that what is your product really? What are you selling? And really in my business, what you're selling is the experience that that child has, right? So more than I think sometimes people focus on the wrong things, right? So you pull into a fancy swim school in a nice part of town in a strip mall, and everything is clean and shiny and it's all primary colors and there's slogans everywhere, and it looks like a preschool. It's so nice
Hmm.
inside, and your child has one teacher one day or maybe another teacher another day, and they're spending half of the time sitting around, or they're learning about life jackets or canoeing or lightning, but you brought your child to learn to swim.
Hmm.
And if what you're selling is that 30 minutes that that child is interacting with that coach is all that matters. Okay. And if people don't believe me, all they have to do is everybody knows what your average swim school looks like. Come drive and see my place. Again, when you drive up, is this a fireworks stand? What is this tin building with a gravel driveway? A gravel parking lot, and it's right next to this house. It's right along the highway. This is weird. And you come in and it's very cramped. There's no space and all these happy sounds going on. And these kids, I have two little girls. April 1st is going to be our 4-year anniversary of our first swim lesson here at Patriot Swim School in Texas. April 1st will be 4 years. And we have two students that have been with us 3.5 years, and they learned to swim 3 years ago, but they keep coming back. And I had to create a new class called the class that's for graduates, and where they do competitive swimming skills and they just swim farther and they have the whole lane. And I had to create classes for kids that won't go away because they keep coming. Why? Because their experience in that 30 minutes is better than the experience they have at any other youth program in the area. So they've probably been to basketball, they probably tried soccer, they went to dance classes, but they want to keep coming swimming. Why? Because their coach was awesome, and it didn't matter that the look of the facility or the website, those things don't matter.
Right.
So to answer your question, what I learned the first time, granted in Las Vegas, I had more access to more qualified candidates, right? Because in a city, you're going to have more former swimmers running around that are going to see your ad and come apply for a job as an instructor. So here, it's a challenge to find the right people, but even knowing what does that mean, the right people? I don't hire people with a swim lesson experience. I learned my lesson because they're going to try to do it the way they did it before, and we do it better than that. So I don't want the person that taught swim lessons before, because I don't want to try to get them to stop using the terminology that they did before, doing whatever system they did before. I hire people. I just hired a coach that didn't know how to swim. I mean, could swim, but not swim like a swim coach thinks of swimming, right?
Hmm.
And I spent the first week training her, teaching her the 4 strokes, so she would even know what I was talking about when teaching her how to teach swim lessons, and then taught her how to teach swim lessons. But what I did was I hired a person that loves and knows how to work with kids. So what I learned that first time through is it's all about the experience in the water. Now, I was blessed when I started it. I started it with myself and my wife, who are both swimmers and swim coaches, right? So we started with the dream team, right?
Hmm.
And then and as we grew, our additional coaches, who were they? They were my senior swimmers, right? My juniors and seniors in high school that I taught from the time they were 10, 11 years old, right? So not only did they really know their stuff and they knew how I wanted it taught, but they also were highly motivated because they were working for me. They were working for their coach. The adult most important in their life behind their parents, and the one that, if you pissed them off, you weren't going to be on the A relay, right? So you have highly motivated staff when they're your swimmers, if that makes sense. So that was a little bit easier in that realm, but the lesson was still learned. It's all about the coach.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, like the product you're delivering, the service you're delivering is the most important thing, and that's going to build your book of business. You kind of hinted to it. Let's give the audience some context about, your facility and the number of employees. Kind of just walk us through briefly of like how much lane space you have, how many employees you have. What does that look like and feel like when someone shows up to get a swim lesson?
Yeah. So we have one 25-yard lap lane. It's 8 feet wide, 4 feet deep, 4 feet constant the whole way. I have 4.5 feet of deck on one side, 1.5 feet on two other sides, and 2.5 feet at the end. So just enough to barely, walk. I can walk around it on three sides. And we have lane lines, backstroke flags, everything's regulation, competitive swimming. We Right now, at beginning of February, have just over 50 students. So 50, I believe today we're at 52 or 53 students. In June and July, we'll be well over 100, 120, 130 students in June and July each summer. And, in December, if we're oftentimes in the past, we have been in the 40s in December, January. This is the best January that we've had um, in 3.5 years. One of our challenges is educating our customers, right? Because we're in the Midwest, and so we're not running a swim school in Southern California or Florida, where swimming is A, more popular, but B, a year-round activity. It's school just got out. Oh, we're going to start going to the lake, or we're going to start using the pool in the backyard, is how swimming is thought of, where we are. So, the very first year, in 2022, when we started, we had our first swim lesson April 1st. That June, we had 150 students. So April 1 to June 15, we went from 0 to 150 in that amount of time, because swim lessons had never been offered in Springtown before. So we were the shiny new toy, and word got all over Facebook, and everybody and their dog brought their child, and we were just inundated that very first summer. And this last summer actually was 25% less than our first summer right out of the gate, if you can believe it. But now December, January, and February is much better. So people are figuring out, well, when there's snow on the ground and we can't play soccer and we can't play baseball, we can go swim, because that's a novel idea in our location. So now it's starting to balance out, which is a lot better for, staffing and for running the business. But we have 4 coaches working right now. So like I said, just about 52, 53 students. I am coaching 2 nights of the week. I have our coach that's been with us 3.5 years. That's our longest serving coach. That's not myself or my wife. She's coaching 2 nights a week, and I have another coach that coaches 4 nights a week as far as the group classes go. Now, aside from that, I have a half a dozen private lessons that I do that all revolve around competitive swimming, that are, anywhere from kids with A times to another one with tags times to another one that has futures cuts, and she's about to get her first junior national time. That's what I'm doing as far as private lessons. And then my wife is doing our adaptive aquatics. So she, on the weekends, she teaches kids that are highly autistic. So non-speaking autism and Down syndrome.
Something that you mentioned in there that I think would be really helpful for teams to hear your perspective on. You had your first lesson April 1st, but by June, 150.
Yes.
How did you guys handle that early marketing? How did you get the word out? How did you get to 150 within such a short period of time?
So that's a very interesting question. So people have asked me many times, how I advertise, and my answer is I don't. I mean, that's really not true. I do have a couple of 30-foot long banners on my fence in the front of the property because I have 200 feet of frontage on a busy highway, the main highway that runs north and south through town. So everybody has to drive by my place if you live in the area. And so I have a sign, a tall sign alongside the highway, plus the signs on the fence. But really, I've never really advertised other than, I did as an experiment, I did a Facebook ad for 30 days one time. That's probably all and then, just using my Facebook page, our website. But initially, at the very onset, that first spring, I did contact the superintendent of the local school district, and I completely expected him to say no, because I've worked with school districts before, and I know about political correctness and all that kind of stuff. And if we were a nonprofit, we probably could get some partnership. But being a for-profit company, I thoroughly expected him to say no. But it's Springtown, Texas. Okay. So it's a small town at the time. It's grown a lot the last couple of years, but at the time, Springtown had, 3,000 residents. Right. And now it's double that, just a few years later. But I contacted the school district and asked if we could get a flyer out in the schools, elementary and intermediate school grades, K through 5. And he replied back, said, sure. Kids, this is a safety issue. We want our children to be safe. We want the kids to learn how to swim. Yes, you can make your flyers, and I'll have all the principals email you the numbers that they need for each grade. You need to bundle them in bundles of 25. People clip them together in stacks of 25 and deliver them to the offices. We'll send them home. So that was very helpful, having, every child K through 5th grade take home a Patriot Swim School flyer that very first May, a week before school got out. I'm sure was very helpful. Don't plan on your, whoever's listening to this, maybe it's pretty rare thing for a school district to do that for a for-profit company, but they definitely saw a need in this area. This last year was in the time that we've been operating, almost 4 years now. This last year, 2025, was the first year there wasn't a drowning in Springtown since we've been here. So, you could argue that, yes, it was really in the best interest of his families, his students, the district to, partner with us in getting the knowledge out that there's an opportunity for your child to learn to swim locally.
Hmm.
That was the first and only advertising campaign that we've done. Ever since then, because people do their shopping online now for services for the kids, they look online and they listen to their friends. And so when our students all do go through an assessment before they're registered. And when you register for an assessment, you have to tell us how you heard about us. And so I look at that every time I schedule an assessment. I look at the answer to that question. And it's always either Facebook, Google, or a referral from another customer. So it's always one of those things. They either search for swim lessons and they find our website. And then the first thing in the center of the homepage of our website is book your assessment here. And so they book their assessment. When they book their assessment, we have their phone number, email, and face-to-face meetings scheduled, right? Because that's where we get them is, they meet us. We tell them how we're different. We do an assessment, which no other place I've ever gone to has ever wanted to assess my child for free before registering me. This place is really different. And that doesn't happen if you can't get face-to-face with the person. So we don't let people, look at our skills and sign their child up for station 1, 2, or 3, because the parent's always going to overestimate their child's swimming ability. But you're providing a free service and you're wowing them at that very first meeting with, because I do all the assessments, right? So I make sure that parent is impressed, with their child has a good time and how the interaction goes. And then they leave, they're registered, right? Then you leave, you don't go home and think about it or go online and register. You do the assessment and they say, okay, well, what time works for you? And because of Captain and the iPad that they gave me, right? We do their assessment and their registration in under 60 seconds right there in the pool deck, and they leave registered for their classes. So
That's awesome. So I like there's some really good nuggets in there that you just shared. Like one, advertising through schools is I think by far the best hands down way to grow some school, especially out the gate. Like you just have to budget that in there, right? And you were able to get that for free kind of with small town connections and other people may do that. But even just going to a school and asking the principal, like, hey, can I send out a flyer? Can I donate $500 to the school and you send out a flyer on my behalf?
Hmm.
Being creative and just going to the 2 or 3 elementary schools around you, like, you only need 100 kids. If there's 600 kids at
Yeah.
elementary school, that you do too. Like, the conversion rate's not that high. And
Yeah.
then I
Or
think you're
attending their events.
yeah,
Yeah.
right?
With a
And
booth.
yeah, and then, like, the online presence, right? Like, most parents, they pull up Google Maps of, like, swim school because
Hmm.
they're gonna find the closest swim school to them, right? And having those Google reviews is so critical, but it's like, hey, to launch, find an advertising partner like a school system. But to maintain that Facebook and Google Maps and Google reviews, I think is so critical to just long-term success because that's modern day word of mouth, right? Is a
Yeah.
Google review and your Google page on Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever. That's awesome. And you kind of dove into like our next subject, which is the market segment. So you have Swim America group lessons, you
Yeah.
have private competitive lessons.
Uh-huh.
Do you do any like triathlete and adult master swimmers private lessons as well, or is that a market segment for you?
We do. Yeah. We've actually done quite a few adult lessons, triathletes. I say quite a few. I mean, I can count them on my fingers, but I guess I say quite a few because it's not something that we promote or seek out. But when people come looking for it, if you have a pool sitting there with nothing going on in it, it's another drop in the bucket. It's more revenue.
Hmm.
So in the summertime, we simply can't. Right.
Yeah.
So we're doing lessons in the morning, lessons in the evening, and the pool is resting in between because I have one 25-yard lap lane. I have 18,000 gallons of water. So if you have 150 students, keeping that water beautiful and clear, I mean, that bather load wise, 150 is like maxed. And I'm a certified pool operator that's been doing it for 35 years. I know what I'm doing. And I'm checking that pool in the summer twice a day. And I'm making sure the chlorine and pH and stuff are perfect. And I'm using clarifier and I've oversized my pump and filter. That's as many bodies as we can put through that amount of water.
Hmm.
So, but in the off months, okay, so the triathletes, if they're smart, they go looking for swim instruction in the off season. That's a great thing to do when that pool's sitting there and you still got to heat it, you still got to put the chemicals in it, and it's not being used near to capacity. Then, I mean, if I was still in my 20s or 30s and I was more ambitious, I would probably be advertising that or
Hmm.
trying harder. I'd be going to those triathlon Facebook pages more often and having conversations with people. To be honest, just straight up honesty with both of you is that I don't really care if I have more of those they're because it's going to be me doing them. It's the amount of my time per dollar is not nearly what it is if I train a coach. I invest some time and train a good coach, and they're teaching 4 students, and then 30 minutes later, teaching 4 students. And I go and I check on them, and I go out to the pool and I sit down for 5 or 10 minutes. I chat with some of my customers. I come back inside the house and do some chores or eat a meal or whatever. Go back out and check on lessons, and that those students are coming and going and my staff are taking care of them. If I'm doing that private lesson, it's just a lot more of my time for the revenue that's generated. So I guess it has its time and place. June, July, August are not the time, but we do them in the winter, but they're a supplement. And I don't in a larger metropolitan area, I could run a whole separate business coaching master swimmers, triathletes in Florida, Southern California. I could probably make as good or better of a living that I'm making now just teaching adults if I had my own water. But that's not where I am, and it's not our situation. So it can be done, but it would not where we're located, as far as being the primary source of revenue. Again, I'm doing because I spent several years coaching competitively in this area. Swim teams around here, parents around here know who I am. So the students that I have, their parents, when their child starts mysteriously dropping time meet after meet, then their other parents talk to them and say, "Oh, we started taking her to Coach Russ," and then and invariably. I've had this steady stream for 3.5 years. I've had this steady stream from the nearby large team where kids don't receive a lot of coaching because one coach has got 30 or 40 kids. So they don't get a lot of coaching at practice. And the students that I have wind up creating for me additional students. So I've got a pretty steady stream of as many as I want to do.
Mhm.
For that, my wife could probably do adaptive swim lessons full time, but she doesn't have the time because she's a school teacher. But nobody for 100 miles does what she does, and it's a lot of training and a lot of certification and a lot of specialized background that's hard to find that she does because it's a passion, because somebody needs to do it and those kids need her is the only reason that she does it. That's not for the money at all, but
Mhm.
nobody's who can do swim lessons for non-speaking special needs kids, So that's kind of is it a revenue opportunity? Absolutely. Are there people who do that as their entire business? Again, in a larger metropolitan area, you absolutely could. And you make a very, very good living if you want to take the time to do swim angelfish or something like that and get those specialized certifications in it. It's something that we're blessed to be able to brag about,
Mhm.
on our website and with our customers. So I guess it adds to our legitimacy as a full service business. And I think one of the things that makes us unique is we can teach kids from blowing bubbles up to getting that Division I college swimming scholarship. Right now I have three prior swimmers of mine that are all at the Air Force Academy getting their education, for free. A lot of people, they don't come looking for that, right? But when they hear that, they still feel like I'm in the right place,
Yeah.
So if you can have one foot in that competitive swimming realm, I think it really, adds a whole layer of legitimacy to your business versus we're not a swim school that anybody's ever going to grow out of like most are.
Yeah, I was kind of coming full circle to something you said previously, taking an inventory on yourself, identifying the gaps that you have in all the skills needed to run a team. And a couple other things you said, like hiring instructors that you're able to mold because you
Hmm.
know the system that you want.
Right.
Something you just touched on was delegation, and I think that might help kind of tie up that whole section of what we've talked about. How do you see delegation in the role of leading a team? Because I think that's something that a lot of coaches probably are a little bit challenged around. I feel this myself too. It's like if you feel like you can just get the thing done, you'll just do it yourself. But I've
Uh-huh.
seen this time and time again where coaches overwhelm themselves because of a lack of delegation. So I'd be curious, given
Yeah.
your history, like how has delegation played a role and what can coaches do maybe just to help get comfortable with the idea of delegating? And then what are some things they could do to actually delegate so that they're not overwhelmed and they can start thinking beyond the day to day and where they want to take the business?
Yeah, that was always a challenge for me. I always had an attitude of if you want something done right, do it yourself. And usually anything that I did delegate, I was always disappointed in the results. I know that sounds tremendously arrogant, but one of the things that I think is a barrier for a lot of competitive swim coaches is ego. Right. And I've seen firsthand the challenges of working for a board. Right. And I know we could have a whole nother 2 hour conversation over why it's better to own your own team than to work for a board. However, depending on your situation, you might benefit tremendously from delegating. You just have to, first off, you have to identify what somebody else needs to do, right? That honest inventory of yourself. If you're the numbers guy, and I know coaches like that, they're all about the math and keeping track of, finances or whatever is in their wheelhouse. It's not in mine. I don't want anything to do with that. And you can balance the books and provide a treasurer's report and stuff, and you're not going to mess up the experience for the athletes. Why not delegate that? You have to, of course, be careful in areas that impact, as we were discussing earlier, your real product, which is the interaction with the student in this case, or with the competitive coach, the athlete, there's always a risk associated in the, especially in the competitive swimming world, with delegating, because then are you giving up control, or who are you encouraging to be more involved? Sometimes you encourage somebody to volunteer and get involved, and a year later you're really sorry you ask that person to get involved, be more involved, or to do this thing, right? So you really need to say, what, for us to move forward, whether it's your team or your business, for this to move forward, for this to grow, for this to be successful, what do I need to focus on? Okay, so what am I best at? And really, in my opinion, a coach, when you boil it all down, a coach is just a communicator, right? So if you're not an outstanding communicator, especially with, not necessarily with peers, right? But if you're not a great communicator, if you're an age group coach with, 8 to 12-year-olds, or if you're a senior coach, if you're not a great communicator with teens, you're in the wrong line of work. And that's just something you can't delegate, right? So if you're not a great communicator, you need to just find a different line of work, right? But there are a lot of great communicators out there that have a passion for swimming that make great coaches, but they're horrible business people, or they're horrible. They're, keep them away from the computer, away from the website, because they're going to jack it all up. You can find somebody to do the website or to do this or that. You need to focus on the time with the athlete, right? Anything else that you don't excel at, you have to admit, I don't excel at this. And maybe you can work on it and you can try to grow. But in the meantime, find somebody else to do it. And I think where my mind immediately goes when you ask me this is the talks that I've given at Ask a World Clinic, 2 times, where you have a room full of people that are nodding and smiling, and they're engaged and like, this is awesome. This is great what you've done. And then you talk with them in the bar an hour later afterwards, and you ask them, okay, so when are you going to break ground on your pool? Well, I could never do that. Why did you just waste an hour listening to me for? And they thinking, well, I couldn't do the plumbing. I couldn't do the electrical. Fine. I didn't do the electrical either, but I had a customer who was an electrician. And instead of paying me $200 a month for two of his grandchildren to be in my swim lessons over the next year, he did the electrical, and then we traded. If you're a coach or you're running a swim school, you have all these customers or parents that do. Somebody's an attorney, somebody's a doctor, somebody's an electrician, somebody's an engineer, right? And you find somebody who's motivated to fill in the gaps for you. At least that's what I did.
You were highly resourceful, which I think is another skill set that you haven't really mentioned yet about yourself, and that is the resourcefulness you've used to grow the business and take those risks. So you have limited pool space, and you run a lot of programs, and you've kind of alluded to kind of like the schedule, but kind of how do you prioritize how you use that single lane? Like what,
Right.
how do you maximize your revenue based off bathing load, pool space, and time of day? Like, what does that look like for you?
Right. So you have to understand who your customer is. And we have a lot of homeschooling where I'm located, but the bottom line is the majority of our customers are school age children. So prime time is always going to be 5 to 7 in the evening. And so that is precious time, right? Nothing interferes with small group classes. Nothing gets to be in the pool between 5 and 7 Monday through Thursday than small group classes, because we know that's what makes the money. Okay. That's where we get to serve the most people. And I think every swim school has a large segment of parents that come in looking specifically for private lessons. And I spend a lot of time and energy trying to re-educate those folks that come and see me and push them into our small group lessons, because they're asking for private lessons because they had a bad experience somewhere else in a class of 5 or 6 or 7 kids with a substandard coach. And so I don't want that anymore. I want private lessons, right? Or they had somebody coming to their home and doing lessons in their backyard in their pool, and it's what they're accustomed to. But you don't understand what our small group classes are like, right? So if I said yes to every parent that brought their child asking for private lessons, I'd do a whole bunch of those and I'd make half as much money. But once they find out that our classes are smaller, our coaches are better, our classes are well supervised, that the owner is either could be teaching your class, or if not teaching your class, they're watching your class be taught, which doesn't happen anywhere else. They're willing to give that small group class a try. And then when they do that the very first week and they're impressed, then you have them sold. So we get as many people as possible into our small group classes, so you can be teaching 8 kids at a time and a new 8 kids every 30 minutes during that prime time, which is 5 to 7, a Monday through Thursday. People don't want to come on Friday. We have classes in the middle of the day on the weekends, between 2 and 4 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday, that we carve those out as small group private lesson time, and we won't consider anything else at that time. So then my kids that want competitive privates for me or special needs classes for my wife or adults, they're coming in the morning on their lunch break. Weekend mornings are the big one. Most of my competitive private lessons are right before or after group lessons on the weekend. So just before 2 or after 4, because maybe they had morning practice that Saturday morning or Sunday after church. Occasionally I've done them later in the evening during the week, but I don't want to do that because now that I'm not a competitive swim coach, I want to have a life. And so I don't want to be out there at 8 p.m. So, then you have opportunities there with the homeschool crowd, which is probably one of the most underutilized, under-accessed market segments. I think people need to open their eyes and imaginations to, is doing group classes at noon, because it's these kids' PE class. So we've done some of that as well.
That's a great market segment to bring up, is kind of like that blue ocean. Like, no one's really targeting homeschools. Usually they're like, when I coached way back in the day, it fell into our lap, honestly. Like, this homeschool group that needed a PE class once a week or twice a week.
Hmm.
And it was 30 kids that would show up, and we coach them from 1 to 2 right after my master's lunchtime session. And it was a great revenue stream for the team, because there were no meets that we were dedicated to. It was 2 days a week. They took off in the summers, which was great because we didn't want to coach over the summer in the middle of the
Hmm.
day. We were typically really busy doing clinics and stuff at summer league pools, but it is a great market segment. And they also have a ton of time flexibility, typically, those parents. So
Yeah,
you could really fit them around your schedule, which a lot of people are afraid to do, of saying, hey, this is when I'm available. You need to be here when I'm available to customers. And they always try to bend to the customer,
sure.
and they stretch themselves really thin. That's a really, really great point. So wanted to also kind of like pick your brain, because there's a lot of coaches out there who look at the longevity of a swim coaching career. And like you said at the very beginning of the onset, like, unless you're a head coach, an associate head coach, coaching in college, coaching at a big club, your spouse better make a lot of money, because you're not going to be able to support a family. You're not going to be able to buy homes. It's going to be a tougher life, right? Financially, and creating that financial freedom and financial security is really important. What's some advice you would give coaches who want to create that financial security for themselves? Maybe where to start, or
Hmm.
how just to like look around and recognize the opportunity that you did. You looked around, you saw an opportunity, and you went after it. Like, what's some advice you could give them?
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to look around, and you have to think outside of the box, and you have to be open to doing something unconventional. So the way that we got into the pool at the Air Force Base was when I was coaching for a YMCA again, and working 60, 70 hours a week for not a lot of pay, trying to get that YMCA to create a head coach spot, because at the time I had to be the aquatics director. I had to run the fitness department and coach a swim team of 200 kids all at the same time, to make just even a reasonable salary. And I told him, I will do this temporarily. I'm not going to work 70 hours a week my whole life. I'll give you 12 months to create a head coach position. And, oh no, we can't afford that. Da, 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 da. Well, but we have 200 more customers that are paying, $150 a month that we didn't have before. Why can't we afford this new position? So then I said, okay, 9 months, okay, 6 months, and basically gave him plenty of warning, and finally said, well, I'm going to have to leave. And one of my senior swimmers, because our YMCA was, 5 miles from the Air Force Base, one of my swimmers, his father was a fighter pilot on the Air Force Base, and had been for 20 plus years. So he was pretty far up the food chain, and he was able to get me a meeting with the colonel that ran all the facilities on base. And then, so I sat down with, with the colonel who made the decisions about the use of the fitness center. It just so happens his wife was a highly competitive swimmer, swam in college, swam Division I. And, here's a pool that's being used literally by not more than a dozen people a day, a 25-meter, 8-lane pool that maybe 10 or 12 people a day would even get in. And here's a revenue opportunity and a way to benefit their families and the community at large. But you don't know those opportunities are there unless you stop and look around and you talk to people. I mean, if I didn't know my customers, if I didn't talk to my parents, I wouldn't know that Garrett's dad was a fighter pilot, right? I wouldn't have known that it was even an option. Okay. Then secondly, you have to do a good enough job and make enough of an impact that people are motivated to help you, right? So if you're a mediocre coach or you run a mediocre program, people aren't going to go to bat for you. They're not going to roll up their sleeves and help you accomplish something, right? But when you're changing people's lives, people will go to the ends of the earth to help you do that, right? And everybody wants to be a part of excellence. Everybody wants to be a part of something excellent. And even the parents, they're not in the pool swimming, but when they see the team, and their own child accomplishing, they'll do anything for you. So all those things created that opportunity. If you don't partner with people, if you don't share with people, a lot of coaches, they're understandably guarded with their parents, right? Because sometimes that love for their kids, it cuts both ways. Sometimes it'll cause people to walk through fire to help you. It'll also make people do anything they can to destroy you if they think, they're not getting what they need from you either, right? So you have to, I guess, believe in yourself enough. You have to be willing to accept help, like you said, from people and have partners. But if you think it has to look the way everybody else does it, going back again to those talks that I've given at ASCA clinics, I've laid out for people, this is what we did. This is the way we did it. And then they're paralyzed with, well, I don't have all of those life experience that you have. I'm not a do-it-yourself, or I can't pour concrete. I can't do whatever. Maybe that's true, but you can do a whole lot of things that I suck at. And you can focus on those things and find, I didn't do a lot of the admin. I didn't build my website. I found somebody to build my website. I paid way too much too, but I'm sure other people have other resources than what I had. But you have to look around and you have to ask and you have to network. I guess that's the word I was looking for. You really have to network, and see, maybe building a pool isn't the answer, for one of the viewers. Maybe partnering like I did at Nellis Air Force Base, maybe utilizing existing water is the answer for that, that question that you posed about how do you coach swimming and still, are able to afford a house, support a family, that sort of thing. That might be doing clinics, that might be doing your competitive swim coach in a particular town, and you've got a triathlon community, you have a master swimming community. Who better to do a weekend swim clinic? Master swimmers will think nothing of dropping a couple $100 for a 5 or 6 hour in-depth clinic where they get some video taken of their stroke and some expert advice in a larger metropolitan area. You could do one of those a month. I could make a living just doing masters and triathlon swim clinics in Florida or California if I wanted to do that, if that's where I wanted to live. With my resume, I could do a clinic once a month for 15 to 20 people, rent a pool and charge them $300, $400, $500 each to, give them some sets, watch their strokes, videotape and give them comments. Maybe it looks like that. Or maybe you have enough room where you could actually build and have your own water, where you live, but you can't be stuck on, well, I watched this captain podcast and this guy built his own pool and he has his own 20, and that's all wonderful. Oh, but I don't have a spot to put it. You probably know somebody that has a spot, right? you probably have somebody that would be interested in making some money off of this property that's sitting there doing nothing. You just have to, not take no for an answer and just, well, I'm going to find a way, and your way is going to look different than my way.
Yeah.
But if you don't start looking and you don't start thinking, it's not going to just fall in your lap.
Yeah. So, as a follow up to that, because I think you really touched on a couple of things, the paralyzing fear of not knowing what to do or how to do it or what to do next. And a lot of that comes from, we've heard from other talks, like just networking and getting to know your customers is going to create opportunities for you, because
Right.
majority of the people who swim are on the wealthier side of the world, right? Like they
Yeah.
make more money, they're upper middle class people are higher. Um, what's like getting started is probably the hardest part, right? Is just taking that first step on the path, the first step on that trail. What is a good first task for someone to do? Is it
hmm
just that self inventory? Like like how do people actually just get the ball rolling? Because it's easier to, take the next step once you're already falling forward.
Right, right. So I think for the younger coach, for if I could talk to 25-year-old me or 30-year-old me, or somebody else that's interested in winding up where I'm at, it's taking that inventory and saying, okay, well, what if in 20 years or even 10, if I want to be doing this or making this amount, what are the holes? What are the gaps that I need to fill, and start working on those? Because if oftentimes what happens is whatever a person's current role is, whatever the job that they're in, their focus is being good at that job and not necessarily thinking, well, what do I need to be good at by 10 years from now? Or, because maybe your circumstances don't force you to grow in that direction. Now,
Mm,
I happen to have had circumstances that, forced me to learn things. So I learned how to repair a pool because, I had that job for a while, right? And I learned how to run a pool because I had that job for a while, and I had different jobs that equipped me with everything that I need to run the business that I'm running now. But if you think I want to run a business someday, if you're an assistant coach at a team, if you're coaching the gold group or the silver group or the bronze group, you're never going to gain those skills doing that job to run your own business someday. So, well, where do I get that from? Do I take some classes online at the local community college, or do I, when I'm choosing my side job that's going to help me make ends meet, am I choosing a job that's going to enrich me and give me some more skills that I could use 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road? Or am I just taking the first convenient thing that comes along? So I think you have to, if you know where you want to go, you have to start, challenge yourself to do things that force you to grow in those areas.
yeah, building that tool chest up, right? That you have all the tools to knowledge to make good decisions when the time comes for you to take that leap of faith. Now that's a great piece of advice, especially for young coaches, that are getting started, that are trying to make ends meet. Part of making that ends meet is also personal growth, so that you gain those skills to advance in the swim community, whether that's up the chain of becoming a head coach and you have the skills to run a pool, or maybe that private school down the road is going to hire you to be their coach, and now you're operating a private school pool and you can do what you want with it, and you can set up your contract to create that
Right.
longevity and those additional revenue streams, because like you said, it could look like summer camps and clinics. And if you have the skill set to run a pool, and now you get this free access to pool space, and you can run tremendous amount of money through just camps and clinics over the summer or in the spring
Yeah.
or throughout the year. This has been awesome. Thomas, did you have any other questions before we capitalize all of Russ's time for the day?
Yeah, no, I think I think this has been wonderful. Like all over the map, we've been able to touch on a lot of different things that I think are very actionable, which is important too. Like that's something Chris and I talk about with this is trying to identify and extract that actionable insights and feedback for these coaches. So no, this has been great. I don't have any other further questions.
Yeah. So Russ, thank you for your time. We love you as a customer as always. We think what you're doing is awesome, and congratulations on, getting your town to be water safe. Like, you're a big influence on that. And that's something that, as a swim coach, as you grow as a swim coach, you start to understand like, hey, swimming is more important than just junior national times and state championships and LSC records. Like, it truly saves lives. And whether you're teaching a kid that may one day jump in the pool to save a kid, or you're just teaching a kid how to swim so they don't drown. So if they fall in the lake or fall off a boat, like, they're safe.
Yeah.
That's really important. And to have a town go from having consistent drownings to not having any is a really big deal. So congratulations on that.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.